Hello, and welcome to Brivia's June 2023 webinar on values. My name is Steve Smith, and I'm Brivia's Vice President of Market Development. We are so glad you are joining us here today. Did you know that this is our 6th webinar of 2023, and it's our 23rd webinar since December of 2020. You can view all of our webinars for free at any time on briviaconsulting.com. Just under the resources tab. We also have handouts for several of our recent webinars for you to enjoy as well. So at Brivia, we make work better, and we do this by providing programs and products that help improve an organization's culture, engagement, and leadership. If you ever want to talk about any one of those topics or any topics related to your people, we'd be happy to have a conversation with you. Please feel free to reach out. For today's webinar, we have you here for about 45 minutes, which gives us plenty of time for Q&A. And I'm going to encourage you to do that right now. Get used to using the chat button. So in the chat, if you can let us know where you're joining us here from today. And also, does anyone like to listen to podcasts like me? Why don't you put in your favorite podcast in there as well? We'd love to hear that from you. So I am joining from my home office in Airdrie, Alberta. It is beautiful out today, a little bit smoky, but mostly beautiful. And my favorite podcast is Working Genius with Patrick Lencioni. So we'll let you put that in the chat. And while we're doing that, I am going to introduce today's speaker. We have Stephen DeGroot, who many of you know and have had the opportunity to listen to before. Stephen is president and co-founder of Brivia. He is an author with a new book coming out in 2024 that we're excited for, and he's an expert on human behavior. So Steve, why don't you turn on your video, and I'm going to hand this over to you.
Hey, thanks, Steve. Can you hear me okay?
You bet. Gotcha.
All right, awesome. Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody, and thanks for that wonderful introduction. I really appreciate the fact that everyone is here. Everyone's got busy things to do. We're here to talk about the true power of values. And I see the chat's already fired up today. It's great to see people from all over the place, from all over the country. Welcome. We love having new people here. We see some familiar faces. And we're here to talk about the true power of values. And from my perspective, there is a lot of talk about values. And as Steve said, use the chat as much as possible, ask questions. We always save time at the end to have comments and questions and try to take the discussion even deeper. So welcome. What we're going to do today in our time together, I'm going to do the presentation for about 25 or 30 minutes or so. I'm going to keep an eye on the time. We're going to start with a reflection on great experiences, make a connection to the role values play in great experiences. Then we're going to get into what all human beings need to survive and thrive, and what do values have to do with that, and what is the true power of values. And then we're going to move into what happens when we live them, and what happens when we don't live the values that we say are important. And what can leaders and organizations do to activate and leverage values for the power that they have and for the great outcomes that we can attain with them. So, one of the things we do at Brivia, most of you who've been with us before, we love to reflect on your own experiences. And today we're going to share some of the highlights of asking over 11,000 people to share their greatest leadership experiences ever. Now, some of you might want to think about yours, right? We ask people when did you were on a team that had a manager or a supervisor where you felt and did your absolute best. We also ask people to think about their greatest team ever. When were you on a team where you felt phenomenal, where you were, coming early, staying late? What were the qualities that made it that great? So if you want, you could even throw into the chat, if you want, while you're thinking about this, what were some of the qualities or ingredients of a great leadership experience or a great team experience? What were the things that you felt were important to you as an employee or as a team member? And I'm already seeing in the chat integrity right out of the gate. So yeah, trust and respect and honesty. Absolutely. One of my favorite things to do is to ask people which ones they think are the most important. Right. So we're going to see in the chat as people, maybe you're going to see some of your own show up in the chat. So you can throw it in the chat, but you might even see some of the things. These are just a summary of some of the actual real data that we've gotten from teams that basically these are some of the top 20 items or qualities, we call it, right? So I can already see in the chat, people are talking about trust, safety, transparency, integrity, so you see some of these on there. What's really cool about these top qualities is that when we ask people, if you could just pick one quality, what would that be, right? And it's really hard because look at all the ones on the screen here on the PowerPoint are important. Now we're already seeing people guess. People in the chat are already guessing. Well, I'm going to show you. Here comes number one. Okay, and this is from thousands of people. Trust. Yes, absolutely. Trust was number one. Now all of them are important. So we can see in the chat, all of them are important and all of them contribute to trust. What was the second one? The second one was care. That people felt like they were cared for. They felt like they mattered, right? Those kinds of things. Now, what's cool is I just did this last week with supervisors and managers, even executives from both mining industry and medicine. And what's interesting is that trust used to always come up as the number one. Now care is coming in a photo finish second, right? Care is ending up there. What is the third one? Well, the third one, it's distant, right? Like not that they're not important, but shared goals, purpose, direction, those kinds of things, what we're actually there to work on is important as well. These are the top three things. I want to pull out trust and care because they're so important. What makes them so powerful? We hear these qualities often. Now, if you look back to the qualities, I've actually highlighted the ones that have an impact. I'm just looking around here because I've got some notes here that I'm using. So if you look at the ones that are highlighted, all of these items make a direct contribution to care and to trust, right? That's why they're so important, right? The actions and inactions. So let's talk about these things, care and trust. Now, before we get started, you can see in the chat, before we talk a little bit more about care and trust, if you look into the chat, what we see in the chat and what people say their experiences are is that care and trust are the consequences of values in action. So when people did integrity, they did accountability, they did transparency, what were those behaviors, right? So this is where values start to become integrated into our experiences and they have a powerful effect. Now, I also want to clarify, some people, they hear the word consequence and it has a negative connotation, right? Consequences is a subsequent experience of something. It's an implication, right? So we like to use it at Brivia as something positive, right? Consequences, what are the consequences? Well, care, let's start with care. What is care? Well, care in relationships, and you know this, right? You know, because you've all experienced it, and look at it in the chat, it's come up so much. Care is a sense that we are important, right? It's the result of actions, people's behaviors, or their inactions, what they do or what they don't do, that actually lead us to feeling that, you know, we matter, or what we're working on matters. That's why it's so important, right? And what's trust? Well, trust in relationships, right, is also a sense of security or safety, right? That is the result of the actions or inactions that are favorable to us. So why is this so important? Well, care isn't accidental. Care doesn't happen by accident. Trust does not happen by accident. And what makes it so important, what makes it so absolutely essential is that it's not just any behavior, but it's a behavior connected to a value that we have deemed is important. So what does this have to do with humans? Well, you already know that when you have great experiences in work and in life, there's a really good chance that values are at play. And what does this have to do with humans? Well, Steve mentioned the book that I've been working on. I'm super excited about. I spend a lot of detail in the book around what human beings need and try to make some connections to values. Well, what are these things that we need? There's three things, according to our work at Brivia, that we continue to see over and over. Is humans need connection. The first thing we need above all, right when we're born, is human connection, right? And this is so, you know, what's so neat is we need it to survive, but we also need it to thrive. And human connection is in various forms. It's in relationships with others, but it's also that feeling that we matter, having that sense of connectedness, a sense of belonging to either the people or a bond with other people. That's the first thing that we need. And I'm also going to make a case for why and how values play into this. The second thing that human beings need to survive and to thrive is a sense of direction, right? That we have we have a clarity and being clear on where we're going and what is the way and why are we going there? It's about structure, routine, predictability. The things that we find out is that when we have connection as humans in our lives and in our work, especially when we have direction, we're protected, right? That protection is that third human requirement. It's the most important. This is about safety. This is about feeling, what's the word I'm trying to, oh, it's not even a word I'm looking for. It's actually a statement. You've probably said it. I'm okay. we're okay. Things are going to be okay here. And when human beings have connection, direction, and a sense of protection, we're doing really, really well. Well, what's that got to do with values? It's like, Steve, I thought we were here to talk about values, not about human thriving. Well, values have got a lot to do with us thriving. Let's start with connection. What do values have to do with it? There's a little bit of an ode to the late, great Tina Turner, right? What values got to do with it? Values connect us to what's important. Values connect us to each other, and more importantly, they connect us to what we should care about and what matters, people and things. Values connect us to care and caring, right? If you want a pragmatic, practical example, right? Values help us connect to the why, right? Why? Why should we care? Why should we bother? Why should we behave in this way? Why should I believe this way? Why should I choose this way? Well, values help connect us to the things that matter. Values also give us direction. They provide direction. They offer clarity on what's important. They help us set expectations, and they help us make choices. On a practical level, let's get to the practical, right? It provides clarity, but it also helps us with the what. What's the point? What is important? Specifically, what's the point of this? Insert anything. What's the point of this behavior? What's the point of this routine, this structure, this process, or even, the strategic plan? And what that does is when we have that connection and direction with us, with our teams at work, we have a sense of protection, right? Knowing why certain things matter, having a why, having direction, knowing what matters and having clarity leads to trust. And trust, when we have trust, we're safe, right? I'm gonna check the chat. I wonder if it resonates. Psychological safety. People are talking about, yeah, absolutely, psychological safety and being safe. That's what values have to do with what we need as human beings. So it's not like a small thing here, right? We're trying to make the connection, because I want you to think back. Let's go back to your experience. I love hearing from you. So in the chat, let's go back to this. Let's go back to a time, right? How would you describe your experience at work under that great leader on that great team? Let's see it in the chat. So when you go back to that experience, right? When you were on a team where you felt, I know my why. I'm under a leader and I know what the purpose is. I know why we're doing what we're doing. I can answer the question, why bother? How would you describe that time at work under a leader where you felt connected? How about when you felt directed, when you were clear on what's the point of the stuff that we're doing? What's the point on doing it in this way, right? Jennifer says a feeling of belonging, confidence, supported, valued, trusted. Oh, fantastic. I love it. Energized. I love it. Look at all the stuff in the chat. Thank you so much for participating. This is what makes values in action profound. It's not a small thing. And you're not alone. I love seeing this in the chat. As you can see, I get really excited. I'm just going to put all of these up because this is what we hear people say when they're in environments where the values that we say are important are being activated, lived, behaved in a way that's creating a sense of care, creating a sense of trust, creating a sense of connection, direction, and protection. They say their energy is high, right? We can see it in the chat, enthusiastic, inspired. Their focus isn't loose. It's not like, what am I going to do today? It's sharp. They're dialed in. They've got that with itness. Their commitment, solid, that this matters and this is what I'm putting my attention on, which leads to great effort. Right? And what's so powerful about this is what I've been writing a lot about is what I call the 4 pillars of motivated performance. And these are them: energy, focus, commitment, and effort. These are the positive byproducts of values in action, right? All right. So values are important. Values have a power. We're talking about this. Values, care and trust are consequences of values in action. And this takes it from this conceptual thing to actually something that's pragmatic, right? Values have a power that connects, directs, and protects us all. And from our work at Brivia, one of the things that we see over and over and over, and it's a big part of our curriculum, that values aren't just, kind of important. They are actually one of the key ingredients in what we call a meaningful experience, right? Meaning is extremely powerful. right? When you're feeling good outside and in work, when you're having those moments where you're inspired, where you're elevated, where your four pillars of performance are firing, right? Activated, is values are in play in that moment. You see, when people put their hand on their chest, or many times when people think about their great leaders or great teams, they put their hands on their chest. There's values embedded: pride, loyalty, making a difference, efficiency, right? All of that stuff. So what's important about that? Values have a power, and when they're tied to your needs, because this is how it creates a meaningful experience. When the values that we decide are important also meet our individual and collective needs, also are attached to and embedded or wrapped around our goals. When the values that are important to us give us an opportunity to step into, demonstrate, develop, leverage our strengths, it creates a power that's exponential, right? And that's why it's so powerful. And that's why we at Brivia, right, take values seriously. And the other thing that we see at a time more than ever, before the pandemic, we were off balance, but one of the biggest things we're seeing is high rates of suicide, high rates of mental health issues. In work, people are more stressed than ever. We're not doing well. The good news about values being embedded in a meaningful experience and high motivation is that they don't only create greater engagement and performance. Just like trust wasn't an accident and care wasn't an accident, our resilience is not an accident. And what we see is that when we are living in relationships, working in environments where we are living our values, we experience the positive byproducts, and our resilience, our mental health, our emotional health, our social, and even our physical health are good, right? When we talk to people about their greatest work experiences, their greatest leadership experiences ever, very few people say I was taking sick time. Very few people say, I wasn't doing my best at work that day, right? This is absolutely critical. And this is why at Brivia, we're really, really trying to dial in and double down on the importance of living our values, right? Values have a power, right? Values have a power. They have incredible power to develop, to elevate potential, to maximize our functioning, our performance, our overall resilience and results for people and the organization overall. And this is something I've been thinking a lot about, right? Values have a power that must be respected. And it reminds me of one of my favorite analogies is of a fire, right? We can all relate to a fire. In this picture, people are gathered around the fire because the fire is important too. It's where we connect, we come together. Fire provides direction, it lights the way. Fire has a power. Fire protects us. Over the centuries, the reason why I like fire as an analogy to values is because not only does it have a power, but for centuries we've protected it. For centuries we've protected them. We had fire keepers. We still have fire keepers, keepers of the fire, because if we don't keep the fire, if we don't protect it, it can't connect direct, right? The fire will either go out or it will burn out of control. And like values, fires, like I said, it connects us, directs us, and protects us. We must have fire keepers. And we're starting to talk more about, do we have values keepers? Who are keepers of the values? And here's the interesting thing, the values do not go away. The power that is embedded in values does not go away. It's always there, and it must be respected, especially if we say certain values are important. Okay, and this is something I've been thinking a lot about and talking to a lot of people about. That once we name a value, okay, once we name a value as important, because where it doesn't have power is when we haven't named it. But once we name a value and we identify the value as important, that is when we give that value life. And that's when we activate its power. Now it has power to do all those great things. But that power also has the ability to go in the opposite direction. And we've all experienced it. One of the things we talk a lot about, and our partner at Brivia, Chris Downey, friend and esteemed colleague, in the last webinar, we ask people often, have you ever been in an environment where the values that we say were important were not being lived or misaligned or incongruent? And people say, yeah. And people have a negative experience. Very few people say it was no big deal. Now, what we like to talk about is, the expectations, what we say is important versus our experiences. what actually is important and how we behave and what we actually put our time into. And what we've seen is there's this gap that exists, right? I call it, for fun, I call it the D gap. Okay, it's not the DeGroot gap, but we often say that the gap between our expectations and our experience is disappointment. And that's usually the most common experience people have. They say, something, we said integrity was important, but everyone's not honest here. We said collaboration was important, but we're in silos and we barely talk to each other. Now, it leads to disappointment, but what we've also seen, because values have a power, is that the bigger that gap is, or the longer that it goes on, that disappointment becomes disillusionment, right? And disillusionment, that the bigger that gap is and the longer that goes on, we can experience demoralization. Right. Now, sometimes I talk to people, they're like, wow, this sounds serious. It seems really dramatic. Are you serious, Steve, Chris, John, Steve, Tricia, people at Brivia, right? Yeah. One of the things that we're seeing and we're hearing more about is moral distress, especially in our health and human services industries. Because when we say something's and we give life, a value is important, our set of values are important, we give life to that value and we don't respect it and we don't honor it, it can lead to psychological, emotional, and physiological suffering when we live and behave or experience behaviors that are out of step with what we say is important. Moral distress can lead to moral injury, and that's why we're trying to take this much more seriously. But it doesn't have to be this big, conceptual, ideological thing that we can't reach, but we're just starting with values must be respected, right? They must be respected, just like the fire. Because we know there's a saying, right? You've probably heard this saying, if you don't respect the fire, you're going to get burned. And one of the things I think is if we don't respect values, we will burn up, or as we're seeing, we will burn out. And here comes the good news. It doesn't have to be this way. It really doesn't. It doesn't. And we've got, one of the things we like to do is equip leaders and organizations with simple, practical, actionable opportunities and tools and strategies to elevate values, to have the power in the life that we know they have, and to have the positive implications for performance, for functioning, for better health, and better results. So it doesn't have to be this way. Now, there's a question, and we've had some discussion lately. Maybe you have this question too. Maybe you have this question. There's two questions, and they kind of go together. I would love to hear you. Sign up for the newsletter. Stay involved. Follow us on LinkedIn. Let's interact, because these are discussions that need to happen. Because just recently, a leadership team that we were working with, we had this question. It's like, so if they seem so obvious. So if values are so important, right? How come we don't leverage them more often? Right? If they have so much power and they're so important, why don't we just use them more often? And a linked question is, well, why does it seem so hard when we do? Or why so why don't we? And then when we do, how come it can seem so hard? How come it can get lost or get dropped or just seem so difficult? And we've just started talking about this. Would love to hear your questions and comments. We're going to get to the questions and comments section. We're going to get to some practical strategies right away. We've also have a giveaway for you, like we always do on our webinars, right? So to these questions, one of the things is, and these are just perspectives, right? We believe that we've forgotten. Just as we've forgotten how awesome we are as humans, I think we've forgotten how powerful values are. Evolution of business is a big part of it as well. Since the Industrial Revolution, just before actually, we've shifted from collective efforts to individual interests. Company interests and culture in business began to separate and segregate employees into factory lines and individual contributors. We're still even using that term. See, some of us believe that we have sacrificed human connection and the values of the collective. And values have been caught in this current, right? This current that's pulling individualistic interest, performance, competition, and we're now fighting for the values that matter most. Right. And I want to credit our CEO, John Hossack, as bringing this idea, and I'm excited about it, about fighting. We're fighting for the values that matter now, right? We're in a fight, and it feels like a fight sometimes. It feels like a fight for survival in moments, survival of values, right? a survival for our own well-being, and a survival for our own resilience. And that's why these conversations are so important, but more importantly, the actions that we need to take to get to better. So here's the question. We're going to get to the practical strategies, right? What do? We got to put them values into action. Got to put those values into action so that we can connect people, we can protect them and direct them, right? The good news is we're at a time, right? And I love seeing the chat. Oh my gosh, there's so many great things in the chat. You got to be reading the chat. We're at a time where leveraging values in a way that we talk about and demonstrate, right, are great for people, productivity, and profit. So we've got to put them into action, right? There's more and more evidence that values in action can inspire, develop, elevate, maximize, transform human potential, let us step into the capabilities that we were meant for, right? And when they're not respected, they have the power to damage, right? That's what we're getting at. They have the power to do great things, to develop. They also have the power to damage and destroy the people and the things that matter the most. And as leaders, we have a choice. This is our choice as leaders. Once we know this, right, we can't be responsible for something we're not aware of, but once we are aware, we must take responsibility. We have a choice. Are we going to connect, direct, and protect our people? Right. The last question I want to ask you to just think about, connected to the analogy of the fire, is who's protecting the fire? When you look around your organization, who's keeping the fire? So here comes the good news, right? At Brivia, simple, practical, actionable steps. Then we're going to open it up to questions. My good friend, Steve, the other Steve. Number one, what values are important to you? So one of the giveaways, and Steve will tell you how you can get to this, is a values reflection exercise that we've developed. Very simple, is to connect with what values are important to you personally first, because this is it. They've got power. What power comes from which values that we have? What do we walk around? What do we live in? What are the values that inspire us, that create greater levels of energy, commitment, and effort towards good things? Second thing is get to know the company values, right? Get to know what values are important to us as a company. Are they out there? Have they been claimed? Have they been named, right? Get to know what's important, and then start talking about how do our values connect with those values, make those connections, and create a shared understanding what behaviors foster and reinforce. Because it's important to say, yeah, transparency, I heard, on integrity, empathy, all this other stuff, community, collaboration, creativity. You saw in the chat, tons of good ones. That's great. Those are words, but what are the behaviors that we need to see in one-on-ones, when we hire, when we have an issue, when we talk to clients, when we come together to collaborate, right? What do those look like? And then celebrate them. This is wild news to me. All of you online, and thanks for being here today, have probably behaved in line with your values and the values that your company, your organization, your team say are important, probably 100 times this week already. But did you celebrate them? Were you acknowledged for them, recognized for them, celebrated, right? And it's important to do that so that we can reinforce the behaviors that we want. And then we got to do something else, call out and correct incongruencies. And that's a little bit tougher than celebrating, but it's important. And finally, something that we talk about lots, and there's a just see a spelling error. My team is probably going, oh goodness, you don't hire for veils, you hire for values, right? Fix the gate. We call it fixing the gate. Right? Often we hire for competency, or we hire for many different reasons, but we often values become secondary or tertiary. One of the things we say is filter for competencies, hire for values, right? Bring people into the organization and to the teams in a manner that aligns them immediately to the way, to the things that matter most and the way that those things matter, okay? And those are some things that we can do to start identifying, actioning, and more importantly, leveraging the values so that we can use the power in the life of values to develop our human capacities to the fullest potential. Okay. And I'm glad that we live at a time, right, where identifying values, putting them into action, and creating more meaningful experiences is not only good for people, but it's also good for productivity and for profit. So Steve, I'm gonna pause there, and I'm going to open it up for questions. now, and see if we have any questions in the chat sent to you.
Yeah.
Awesome stuff in the chat, Steve.
All right. Yeah. Maybe Steve, why don't you have a look through the chat? I got a couple things I highlighted for you, but you
Okay.
can read through that.
Yeah.
And folks, Steve is talking about a values worksheet that we have here for you. So we will be sending that out tomorrow, a link to that along with the webinar recording. But Steve, one of the things in the chat that stuck out to me, and I'm just going to read this comment verbatim, is from Kathy. And it says, in my experience, there is an important distinction between safety and discomfort. Building trust often requires navigating conflict, different opinions and views, and having difficult conversations, which I can feel very uncomfortable, but we are still safe.
Right. That's a great distinction. Thank you so much, Kathy, for sharing that and putting that in the chat. And Steve, thanks for that. Yeah, I mean, it's a great statement. There's a lot there to unpack. Not that we need to unpack, but it just being really clear and the difference between safe and discomfort. And not everybody is comfortable with conversations about development and conflict, right? They can be uncomfortable, but how do we, within that discomfort, Kathy, I like what you're saying, is how do we keep each other safe, right? And safe, again, as we've talked about, is the result of which behaviors do we choose. So if we believe in, safety, well, how do we get there? Well, I'm probably going to use respectful, dignified behavior when I approach you, right? I'm going to give you an opportunity to share your perspective, right? Because we're going to collaborate here, right? So it's the how is embedded in the values, and the how is going to help keep us safe, right? And I think that's important. I think that the talking about comfort and safety, I think that line can be as thick or as thin in certain situations, but I think it's a really important distinction to make, because you're right, Kathy. I think if we waited until we were comfortable to have a difficult conversation, we would never have a difficult conversation, right? And often what makes it difficult, first and foremost, is how important it is. But then, do we have the skills and do we have the confidence to have this conversation in a way that honors the person and the problem? I hope that was helpful. And thanks. I mean, Kathy, that was brilliant. Thank you for sharing that. Steve, are there other questions?
Well, I can tell you Kathy's response is exactly. So I think you nailed it, Steve. I want to go back to one more Kathy's previous comments. Most organizations have defined core values, and it's a great start. However, living the values does not always happen consistently or at all, and it's hugely damaging for employee engagement and the bottom line.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. We see that all over the place. And I think the starting point is and it comes back to leaders, right? Leaders are the keepers of the culture. They're the protectors of the fire, the protectors of the values, right? And Chris, in the last couple of webinars, we've done quite a few webinars on this topic, right? Or we actually touch on this topic. And you're absolutely right. If we've, as an organization or as a team, have decided that a certain set of values are important, we've got to honor and respect those. Now, you said a couple of things. They're being, it's not consistent. So we can start with, where are we living them, right? Where in the team and in the organization and between people are we living them? Let's start there and celebrate those, because sometimes when we focus on what we're not doing, it can feel overwhelming, right? So let's start getting some momentum. Where are we living them, and what are we doing that reinforces and strengthens the behaviors that we want to see? And have conversations. Are we doing what we say is important? Do we have, and if you want to come back to practical, is the values help us answer those questions, right? Why are we doing this, and what's the point? Why should we bother, right? And usually those values can guide us to that. So it's about having conversations with colleagues and with leaders and saying, are we living the values, or are we behaving in a way that is aligned with the values that we say are important? Take it from there. Yeah.
Okay, great, Steve. And I just want to remind our audience too, we got plenty of time here for Q&A, so feel free to continue to add to the chat or ask a question in Q&A. Steve, another comment that came in from Janice: more and more job seekers and employees have put a higher value on well-being and belonging and psychological safety. If the organization doesn't hold these as key values, the disconnect is damaging to the relationship between employee and organization and to organizational engagement. We need to consider how our organizational values connect to individual personal values.
Yeah, absolutely. And great. So another great comments, great sets of questions. I think the last piece I'd like to start with that first is, knowing what's important to us is so critical for many reasons, so that we can negotiate and navigate where we want to work, right? And if you've got organizations that say certain values are important, that can help us navigate, negotiate in that direction. Now, we talk about fixing the gate and hiring for values. This is good for the company and good for employees. Because if we really, as a company, believe that psychological safety through integrity, transparency, collaboration, respect, relationships is important, and we create a gate where we hire people through based on that, those people are going to be better, are going to be okay. Now, then there's the next leap, right? The next leap is now that they're in the organization, on the teams and in the company, did we invite them to a place that actually lives them or don't? Because that's where the incongruence and misalignment happens, right? And it is bad for people. That's what we're seeing. It ranges from disappointing to disillusioning to absolutely demoralizing. Now, you said something really important in the beginning of the statement and the question there, or the set of questions, and that is, companies we now see are making more of an effort to focus on well-being and psychological safety for their employees. Now, I'm going to be honest, business finally knows that they have to now, right? I'm going to be totally honest. This is Stephen DeGroot's perspective, is that treadmills and gyms in companies years ago, right? 3 decades ago, while it was good for people to exercise, it was also a great attempt at getting people to stay at the office, to come early, stay long, right? It was not necessarily for health in the beginning, right? And what we're seeing, and I said this 20 years ago, I said, I don't care, as a human behavior enthusiast and a lover of humankind, I said, I don't care if companies do it because they have to in the future or do it because they want to. It's going to be good for humans. And what we are now seeing is that when we identify important values, we give them life, we activate them, we leverage them, we create greater well-being and we create better results. The last thing I'm going to say, and this was a great ad, and I want to keep questions to keep on coming. Steve, you let us know how much time we have. What I really want to say about this is we know that well-being is important, right? We know that. We often hear, and you'll see in the literature right now, you'll see on LinkedIn, you'll see, we often see people combining health and high performance, right? Because it's the right thing to say, but we know right now that health is not always high performance and high performance isn't always health, right? So we got to be clear that if we say employee well-being is important as an organization and as a team, that's the reason we're doing it. Right? That we don't put the values up to try to attract people, say this is what we are and we're not, because what we do is we invoke that damage that we talked about, right? Now, again, the last thing is most values incongruence are unintentional and unfortunate. And that's why we have to have these conversations, understand the importance of the values to damage or develop and take it seriously and move from there. All right, awesome. Thank you, Steve. And thank you so much for that question.
Yeah. So let's stay on that theme with the incongruence. You covered that really well. Incongruence, your personal values and organizational values. How about with your leaders? So this is a webinar. We have a lot of leaders on here.
Yeah.
We have, so what do they do if they don't align with their leaders' values, or the people on their team maybe don't align with their values? And how does that fit in with organizational values as well?
Yeah, well, if you're a team member, it's about having conversations, looking for allies, looking to where it's happening, right? You do what you can. And I think all of us have the choice, not necessarily the privilege, because I know not everybody can leave if they're unhappy. But one of the things we do say is, if you do see that values are out of alignment or fragmented in some way, you want to bring it to attention in a very dignified way. The good news is, now that there's more research and programs like we have and evidence that values are having a significant impact on performance and well-being, that you can use that and say, hey, what do we really want as a company, right? You can make more of a business case nowadays. Like, and I always say, like, I love to say, if they want to be better for people, awesome. If it's more about business, that's where we're going to start, because we know it's good for people. So you can use, like, how can we leverage our values? I think it was in 2015, Modern Survey put out something that didn't shock us at all. It said that and you can use this, right? Use the evidence and the research. When employees know and understand their company's values, they are 51 times more likely to be engaged. 51 times, not 51%. And this is significant, right? And if I was a leader in a company that was looking to elevate performance and I saw that and took that seriously, I'd be like, wow, this is a way that we can elevate performance. and it's good for people. So have the conversation, but at the end of the day, if you are in a team or in an organization that you're starting to believe does not live the values and it's having a negative impact on your social, psychological, mental, or physiological well-being, you need to make the choice, is this the place I want to be? And what's best for me? And use your own values to navigate and negotiate to a place that will serve you and your health, your family, and your community much better.
Great. Thanks, Steve. And folks, we have time for a few more questions or comments if you want to ask any more questions. Steve, I got another great comment here from Linda. Enthusiasm, loyalty, creativity, and effort exist in environments that support the whole person. Separation of work and home is an illusion. Values related to connection, direction, and protection lived by leaders will enable employees and team members to fulfill their roles more effectively. At least that is my lifetime experience.
Yeah,
Isn't that
well,
great?
there you go. That's absolutely. And you know, as a recovering academic, right? I always use that term because I'm still struggling with this over reliance on research. When Linda, you know that you've got the research. Everybody here in this call, everybody who showed up, and thank you again for being here. We have the research. We know that when we are living values that are important to us, we're enthusiastic, we're inspired, we're optimized, we're motivated, right? And I think we're now getting enough, but I think there's something big is happening in business. And I think we've got to cut many leaders some slack because we're now at a place where we now know what's important, but we don't know how to do what's important. And I'm going to acknowledge this as a recovering academic. I used to teach many students in psychology and social work and even in leadership how important self-determination, empowerment were, honesty, integrity, all of these things. But I never ever once had a course where I actually showed them how to operationalize those values and put them into practice. And now at Brivia, as we go out into the world and we work with amazing partners and we start to go, okay, well, let's put these in a hospital, in a mental health setting, in a e-commerce business. And we say, let's put these values into action. It is not easy. And there's this gap that exists between what we know is important and how to do what we say is important is real. And we've got to be patient with each other, tolerant and supportive and nurturing and encouraging to just zap that gap and come up with simple, practical, and actionable ways to put our values into practice and to be able to do what we say we know is important. Awesome question. Thank you.
All right, Steve, I think we're going to wrap it up here. Thank you, Steve. Great job, as usual. And thank you, everyone, for your participation in today's webinar. Steve, any closing thoughts before I close this off today?
Yeah, always. I just wanted to say thank you, Steve, and thanks to the Brivia team and the people that showed up today. Also, we have the newsletter coming out. I'm excited about that. Join us on LinkedIn. I'm excited because we're going to start sharing some information about the book that's coming. I'm so excited to share some of the stuff I've been working on for 25 years and the Brivia team putting it together and supporting just the courses and the programs that we have. And we're here to help. That's what I want to say. Brivia is here to help. Thank you, Steve. I'm going to pass it back to you.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And I just wanted to let you know that, again, the link to the recording and the handout will be sent out tomorrow. And please continue the conversation. Please reach out. We're happy to chat with you at any point. Also wanted to let you know that we are not taking the summer off from webinars. We're going to change the format a little bit. Instead of a 45-minute presentation, we're going to do a 30-minute conversation. Also going to try and utilize LinkedIn Live for this. So I'm going to send you more information on that in the following weeks and give you an opportunity to ask us questions about the topics beforehand. And of course, during our live conversation as well. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us here today. We certainly appreciate your time and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.